At the award dinner, my father, Arthur, pointed at me during his speech. My daughter, Clara, 34, he said, his voice booming across the grand ballroom of the Chicago Bankers Club, still finding her footing, and still single. He smiled, a gesture that never reached his eyes. But we are proud of her attempts. The ballroom, filled with the city's financial elite, turned to look at me. I could feel the weight of their pity. They were my father's colleagues, his rivals, his friends. They saw me as he had just painted me a failure, a 3-4-year-old spinster. I didn't cry. I didn't even blush. I held my gaze steady and smiled. A small, polite smile. I calmly reached under the high collar of my formal dress. My fingers found the thin gold chain I wore there. My father didn't know. He had no idea. He thought this was his night of triumph, accepting the Banker of the Year award. He thought he was just delivering another casual, public humiliation to keep me in my place. He didn't know he had just walked into the end of his entire world. I hadn't been single for 4 years. Growing up, my father, Arthur Barrington, only cared about 2 things: legacy and status. Our home on the Gold Coast wasn't a home, it was a showroom for his success. Every piece of art, every antique rug, was chosen to impress. He was the founder and president of Barrington Capital. He expected perfection. He demanded obedience. My mother, Eleanor, was the opposite. She was warm. She was the one who read me stories, not stock reports. She was the one who told me my drawings were beautiful. My father just asked why I wasn't at math camp. Art is a hobby. Clara, he'd say, his voice dismissive. Barringtons build empires. He treated my mother like a beautiful, but useless, accessory. His artsy wife. He enjoyed the status she gave him, but he despised her softness. When I was 19, my mother died. A sudden aneurysm. The warmth in the house died with her. My father didn't grieve. He consolidated. His control, which my mother had always managed to buffer, became absolute. I was a sophomore in college, studying art history, finally breathing air that wasn't heavy with his expectations. He flew to my dorm a week after the funeral. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask how I was. He held my course schedule in his hand like it was a piece of trash. Art history, he said, his voice dripping with a contempt that chilled me to the bone. What is this? This is useless. Sentimental nonsense. I told him I wanted to work in museum curation. In her name. He laughed. A short, brutal sound. No, he said. You will transfer. You will go to Wharton. You will study finance. You will graduate with honors. And you will work at my bank. When I tried to argue, to invoke my mother's memory, he cut me off. His voice was like ice. Your mother's sentimentality died with her. You are a Barrington. You will act like it. I felt the walls close in. I was 19. My mother was gone. I was completely and utterly alone with him. I did what he said. I went to Wharton. I graduated with honors. I went to his bank. For 10 years. I worked at Barrington Capital. I was a financial analyst. I was good at it, which only made him prouder and me more miserable. The money felt dirty. Every bonus was just a heavier set of chains. I would sit in those glass-walled meetings on the 40th floor, and he would point to me. My daughter, Clara, Wharton graduate. He would boast to his clients. He paraded me around like a prize. But in private, he dismissed my analysis. Too cautious. He'd say, too soft, too much like your mother. He wanted my presence, my resume, but not my opinion. When I was 28, I tried to leave. I had an interview with a large nonprofit, one that focused on funding arts education in inner-city schools. It was my mother's passion. I wanted to do it in her memory. The interview was a dream. They loved me. They were excited about my financial background. They were ready to make an offer. 2 days later, I got a rejection email. It was cold. formal, and final. I was confused. I had a friend who worked in their development office. I called her. Clara, she said, her voice low and nervous. This is bad. You can't tell anyone I told you this. Your father called our executive director. Personally, my blood ran cold. What did he say? He told the director that you were emotionally unstable, that you were prone to flights of fancy, and not to be trusted with serious money. He called your desire to work here a pathetic, sentimental phase. Then he reminded the director that Barrington Capital's annual donation was their single largest gift. He implied that if they hired me, that donation would be reviewed. He hadn't just disagreed with my life. He had actively sabotaged it. He used his power and his money to lock me in the golden cage he had built. He didn't want me to be happy. He wanted me to be his. I met Leo Hayes a year later. I was at another charity gala I was forced to attend. Feeling numb, I slipped out of the ballroom and, in a moment of sheer desperation, into the hotel kitchen, just to breathe air that wasn't thick with perfume and lies. He was the head chef. He was yelling at a line cook about the temperature of a risotto. He was passionate. He was focused. He was covered in sweat and flour. He saw me standing by the door and stopped. Mid-rant. Are you lost? He asked. I should have been intimidated. Instead, I smiled. I think so. I said. We talked for an hour. Hidden behind a rack of sheet pans. He didn't care about my last name. He didn't know what Barrington Capital was. He just asked me what I loved. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked me that. I fell in love with him. Leo was everything my father was not. He was kind. He built things with his hands. He had just opened his first restaurant. A small, 20-seat bistro in a neighborhood. My father wouldn't even drive through. He'd done it with his own savings and a loan from his uncle. It had no legacy. It had no status. He was just good. I knew what my father would think. I kept our relationship a secret for 6 months. 6 months of real, actual happiness. But I couldn't hide it forever. I thought, stupidly, that if my father just met him, if he saw how good Leo was, he would understand. I invited my father to Leo's restaurant. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. My father walked into the bistro. He didn't look at the reclaimed wood tables or the beautiful Ds. Simple décor. He just looked at Leo. Leo, who had come out from the kitchen to greet us, wiping his hands on his apron. My father looked at him like he was something he'd scraped off his shoe. This is him, he asked me, his voice flat. Leo, brave and proud, tried to shake his hand. Mr. Barrington, it's an honor to meet you. Welcome to my place. My father ignored the extended hand. He looked at Leo's apron. A cook, he said. The word was an insult. Manual labor. He turned to me, his eyes blazing. You are dating manual labor. The tiny restaurant went silent. I was humiliated. Not for me. For Leo. Leo, who just stood there, his hand still out, his face hardening. My father looked at the menu. $10 pasta. He muttered, loud enough for the table next to us to hear. How? Gain. He pushed his water glass away. Is this filtered? He treated my partner, the man I loved, like a servant in his own establishment. It wasn't just arrogance. It was cruelty. He wanted to break Leo. He wanted to show me that Leo was small, and he was big. He left before the appetizers arrived. He called me the next day at the office. His voice was ice. You will end this, he commanded. You will end this embarrassment immediately. I told him I loved Leo. I told him Leo made me happy. Happy, he scoffed. Happiness is for idiots and children. We are talking about our family name. You will not drag the Barrington name through the mud by marrying a short-order cook. I won't stop seeing him, I said, my voice shaking. Then came the words that changed everything. Fine, he said. You have a choice. It's him, or it's this family. If you choose that grease-stained line cook, you are no daughter of mine. You are cut off. You are out. Do you understand me? Clara. He thought it was a threat. He thought he had backed me into a corner. He thought I would cry, beg, and obey, just like I did when I was 19. He was a fool. He didn't realize something. He hadn't given me a threat. He had given me an escape. He had given me permission to finally leave. The dread I had carried for over a decade, the suffocating weight of his expectations, it just vanished. The choice wasn't hard. It was the easiest decision I have ever made. He thought he was taking everything away from me. He didn't realize he was the only thing I had ever wanted to lose. He was the cage, and he had just handed me the key. Okay, I said, and I hung up the phone. 2 weeks after that phone call, Leo and I eloped. We went to the courthouse on a Tuesday morning. I took a sick day. He closed the restaurant for lunch service. It was the happiest day of my life. We didn't have family. We had 2 friends as witnesses, his sous chef, and my one loyal friend from college, who flew in from Denver. I wore a simple white dress I bought at a department store. He wore his only suit. When he slipped the ring on my finger, a simple, thin gold band, I didn't feel like I was losing a family. I felt like I was finally building one. We didn't have a reception. We had pizza and champagne at our tiny apartment above his restaurant. That night, holding my husband, he made a promise. I would protect this. I would protect him. My father had drawn his line. So, I would draw mine. This began the double life. It was a strategic decision, not an emotional one. My father, in his arrogance, assumed that after his ultimatum, I had chosen him. He assumed I had dumped Leo and was back in my cage, properly chastened. He didn't call to check. Why would he? He had given an order. He expected it to be obeyed. He didn't follow up because he truly, deeply believed I was too weak to defy him. His arrogance was my shield. So, I let him believe it. At work, at Barrington Capital, I remained Clara Barrington. My maiden name, it was easy. I told no one. I was a hyper-competent analyst. But I was quiet. I kept my head down, did my work, and went home. But I couldn't go home to Leo. Not really. My father still demanded my presence at family holidays, at his insufferable charity galas, and for Sunday dinners once a month. He expected me to have a respectable address in the city, not an apartment over a bistro. So, I built a fortress, Adekoi, using the inheritance my mother, Eleanor, had left me money my father couldn't touch. A detail that always infuriated him. I rented a second apartment. It was a sterile, 1-bedroom place in Lincoln Park. It was my prop. This apartment was where Clara Barrington lived. It was maintained as if a single, lonely career woman lived there. There was 1 toothbrush in the bathroom. The closets held my work suits, the sensible heels, the clothes my father approved of. The fridge held sparkling water, low-fat yogurt, and salad. There was no art on the walls, no photos, especially no photos of Leo. My real life was with my husband. Across town, our home was small and messy. It was filled with laughter, the smell of garlic and herbs, and Leo's terrible collection of blues records. That was where I lived. But the decoy apartment was my defense. When my father visited, which thankfully was rare and always scheduled, I would live there. I would sleep on the stiff, unused mattress. I would make us coffee in the pristine kitchen. He would pace the living room, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning everything. This place could use a man's touch, he'd comment. Looking at the empty walls, I would just smile. I'm busy with work. Dad, this is the problem. Clara, he'd say, you have no warmth. You don't know how to create a home. No wonder you can't find a husband. You spend too much time at that office. A husband. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. My husband. The man I loved. He had to live with this. Leo had to endure the humiliation of my father's existence. When my father would call my cell phone, demanding I come to some last-minute dinner, I'd have to lie to my husband's face. I have to work late. I'd say, we both knew what it meant. If my father called when I was at our real home, Leo had to be silent. He had to pretend he wasn't there. If the call came from the lobby of the decoy apartment, a surprise inspection, Leo, if he was with me, would have to use the service elevator to leave. He was my husband. And my father's power forced him to sneak out of my life like a delivery boy. The exhaustion of the lies was immense. The weight of the deception grew heavier every single day. Every time I took off my wedding ring and slipped it onto the chain beneath my blouse, it felt like a betrayal. Not of my father, but of Leo. He never complained. He would just hold me when I came home from one of those dinners. My face stiff from hours of fake smiling. It's okay. He'd whisper, I'm not going anywhere. We're doing this our way. He was my rock. He understood. This wasn't about weakness. This was about survival. I was building our future. And the only way to do it was to hide it from the man who wanted to destroy it. Then, 2 years into our secret marriage, I got pregnant. The positive test strip on the bathroom counter of our tiny apartment felt like a bomb had gone off. It was joy. Pure, unadulterated joy. And then, immediate, cold-blooded terror. Leo was ecstatic. He picked me up, spinning me around the kitchen, tears in his eyes. We're going to be parents, he shouted. I started to cry, but my tears weren't just for joy. They were for the reality of our situation. How do you hide a pregnancy? How do you hide a child? My father would find out. He would see me. The plan formed, cold and hard. Even as Leo held me, the deception would have to escalate. Hiding the pregnancy at Barrington Capital was the hardest thing I've ever done. I wore baggy sweaters, then blazers, then coats. I blamed the flu for my morning sickness. As I got bigger, I used my mother's legacy again. I took a leave of absence, telling my father I was attending an intensive 3-month executive finance seminar in Switzerland. He bought it. Of course he bought it. It was about status. It was about work. He was proud. Good, he said over the phone. Finally, you're showing some ambition. This will look excellent on your resume. Ambition. I was 7 months pregnant. The absolute, crushing injustice of it all settled in my heart like a block of ice. I wasn't in Switzerland. I was in our apartment, scared and swollen, while Leo worked double shifts at the restaurant to cover our expenses. The lies became monstrous. My father's granddaughter, Sophia, was born on a rainy March night. She was perfect. She had my eyes and Leo's dark, curly hair, holding her for the first time. I felt a love so fierce it eclipsed everything else. It eclipsed the fear. It eclipsed the anger. I looked at my husband, who was weeping as he held his daughter's tiny hand. We will protect her, I said. It wasn't a promise. It was a fact. When I was supposed to return from Switzerland, I returned to work. I looked different. I was tired. But my father didn't notice. He just saw that his daughter was back at her desk. But now, the decoy apartment had a new every terrible purpose. Living the lie with a baby was a logistical nightmare. It required military precision. We had 2 sets of everything. 2 cribs, 2 high chairs, 2 boxes of diapers, 1 sate for our real home, 1 go-bag set that we stored in a small, cheap storage unit near the decoy apartment. When my father announced he was dropping by for dinner at my decoy apartment, a terrifying new panic set in. It meant Leo and I had 1 hour. We would race to the storage unit. We'd grab the portable crib, the bag of toys, the diapers. We'd race to the sterile apartment. We'd set up a baby's room in the spare bedroom. We had to make it look plausible. And then, the worst part, Leo would take Sophia, our daughter, and leave. He would walk her around the park. He would sit in a coffee shop. He would drive around, for hours, in the Chicago cold, waiting for my text. He's gone. You can come back. My father would walk into the decoy apartment, and I would have to invent the next. Most painful Lee. You look tired. Clara, he said. During one of those visits, Sophia was 6 months old. She was with Leo, sitting in a drafty cafe 3 blocks away. Just busy. Dad, I see you've set up a nursery, he said, peering into the room. My heart hammered against my ribs. Yes, I'm adopting. His face twisted in disgust. Adopting. A single woman. What kind of child will you get? You have no idea what you're doing. You'll ruin your career. I held his gaze. I'm doing it. He scoffed. And the father? Or is there no father? Is this some arrangement? There's no father, I said. The lie tasted like acid. Good God, he muttered. More of your mother's sentimentality. First, the nonprofit. Now this. A bastard child. You're bringing a bastard child into this family. My child. My beautiful, perfect daughter. He called her a bastard. Later, as he was leaving, he looked around the sterile apartment. The same apartment that, 2 hours earlier, had been silent, and was now filled with the faint smell of baby powder and the sterile setup of a life I wasn't living. You know, Clara, he said, pulling on his expensive leather gloves. This place is so empty. It's barren. You have no warmth. It's no wonder you can't find a husband. I just stared at him. The coldness in my heart was absolute. He had no idea what I was capable of. He had no idea what I was protecting. He thought I was weak. He thought I was alone. He was wrong. This was the life he had forced me to build. A life of secrets and decoy apartments and a husband who had to hide in the cold. He had done this. He had forged me into this. And one day, I knew he would pay for it. The command to attend the Man of the Year award dinner came via an email from my father's secretary. It was not a request. It was a summons. For 3 years, I had lived the double life. Sophia was now 3. A bright, funny, beautiful little girl who looked just like Leo. My life was a precarious tower of lies, and the strain was becoming unbearable. Leo was patient, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. The way he flinched when my father's ringtone went off. The sadness in his eyes when he had to pack Sophia into the car and drive around in the rain, just so my father could inspect my barren decoy apartment. I was exhausted. I was done. But I knew I couldn't just stop. It had to end. But it had to end on my terms. I had been waiting for the right moment. The right stage. My father, in his bottomless arrogance, they was about to provide it. The Chicago Bankers Club was his temple. The grand ballroom was filled with hundreds of people. The mayor was there. The governor had sent a video message. This was the pinnacle of his life. His Man of the Year award. He was at the absolute peak of his power and his status. And he had commanded me to be there. Front and center. At the family table. His single, childless daughter. His property. His prop. I wore a simple, elegant dark green dress. And underneath it, on the gold chain, I wore my wedding ring. I sat through the dinner. I ate the overcooked chicken. I listened to the boring speeches. I smiled my polite, empty smile. My father was at the head table, soaking in the adoration. He looked over at me and nodded. A gesture of ownership. See, this is what I am. This is what you belong to. Then, he took the stage to accept his award. He held the heavy crystal statue. He thanked the board. He thanked his colleagues. And then, he did it. He turned his gaze on me. And I want to thank my family, he said, his voice amplified by the microphone. My daughter, Clara, is here tonight. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. I felt the heat of the spotlight. This was it. I had such high hopes for her, he said, his voice taking on that familiar, condescending tone of fatherly disappointment. Wharton. My firm. She's a brilliant analyst. But, he sighed. A performative, heavy sigh. She lacks ambition. She lacks the drive that built this city. I just watched him. My heart was not pounding. It was cold. It was steady. 34. He said, shaking his head slightly, as if in pity. Still no husband. No prospects. She just tries. He raised his glass to me. But she tries. And for that, we are proud. The room applauded. It was polite, but it was laced with pity. They saw me as he had defined me. A failed investment. An old maid. He expected me to blush. He expected me to look down. To take the public spanking. To be the dutiful, humiliated daughter. I did not. I stood up. The applause faltered. The room went silent. A chair scraped. Everyone was watching me. My father. On stage. Paused. His smile freezing. He was confused. This was not part of his script. Thank you, Father, I said. My voice was clear. It was steady, and it carried in the silent room. I reached under the collar of my dress. With a slow, deliberate movement, I pulled the gold chain out. The thin gold wedding band caught the light from the chandeliers. I let it swing. Just for a second. Thank you for your kind words, I said. My eyes locked on his. But I have to correct you on one small detail. I am not single. A gasp rippled through the front tables. My father's face went white. He thought I was improvising. He thought I was lying. What he stammered into the microphone. His voice suddenly uncertain. I'm not single. I repeated. Louder. I've been married for 4 years. His mask of confusion turned to one of rage. He gripped the podium. He thought this was a pathetic, desperate attempt to get attention. He decided to crush me. Clara. Sit down, he hissed. The microphone picked it up. Don't be dramatic. This is not the time for your fantasies. Who would you possibly be married to? His arrogance. It was his greatest weakness. He had just handed me the opening. He thought he was calling my bluff. He didn't know I was holding all the cards. That's the best part. Dad, I said. My voice filled with a cold, bright clarity. You know him. I let the silence hang. He was trapped. He couldn't stop me. I married Leo Hayes. I announced. I heard my Aunt Margaret, my father's sister, choke on her water. My father's face went from white to a deep, mottled red. Who, he barked, as if he didn't hear me. Leo, the cook, the manual labor you forbade me from seeing, the man with grease under his nails, the man you threw out of his own restaurant. I married him 4 years ago, 2 weeks after you gave me your ultimatum. The room was in stunned silence. This was not a family disagreement. This was a public execution. His execution. You lie, he shouted. The man of the year was screaming at his daughter. I'm not lying, I said calmly. I just obeyed you. You told me to choose. And I chose him. I chose a life. I chose happiness. I chose everything you tried to beat out of me. I chose my mother's warmth over your cold ambition. You disgusting, he stammered, words failing him. You did this to me. No, Dad, I said. You did this to yourself. But you're right. I did keep a secret. We kept 2 secrets. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. He finally realized this wasn't an improvisation. This was a planned demolition. I'm not just a wife, I said. I'm a mother. Someone in the back of the room dropped a glass. The sound of it shattering was the only noise. You have a granddaughter. Father. Her name is Sophia. She is 3 years old. She has my eyes. And she has her father's beautiful, curly hair. She is brilliant. And she is funny. and she is the greatest thing that has ever happened to me. I took a step toward the stage, my voice rising. And you have never met her. You have never seen a single picture of her. You walked into my apartment and you called her a bastard to my face. And you had no idea she was hiding in a cafe down the street with her father, my husband, waiting for you to leave. The truth, all of it, was finally out. It was clean. It was sharp. It was a knife. My father. He broke. The mask of the great banker of the year shattered. The arrogant, powerful man was gone. In his place was a screaming, terrified child. "Lies!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "All of it, Lise. She's hysterical. She's unstable," I told them. "Security, get her out of here. Get her out." He was pounding his fist on the podium. The crystal award toppled over and crashed to the floor. No one moved. They were all staring at him. Not at me. At him. They were seeing, for the first time, the man I had known my entire life. The bully. The tyrant. The fraud. As two security guards started to move. Not toward me, but cautiously toward the stage. My Aunt Margaret stood up. She was my father's older sister. The matriarch of the family. The only person he had ever remotely respected. "Arthur. Stop it," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Sight down. You are embarrassing yourself." "She's lying." "Margaret," he screamed at his sister. "Is she?" Arthur Aunt Margaret shot back. "Is she really? Or did you just finally push her too far? We all knew how you treated her. We all knew what you did. You've done this to yourself." That was it. The betrayal. The final blow. His own sister. Publicly. Taking my side. He had lost his allies. He was totally and completely alone. On a stage of his own making. Illuminated by a spotlight he had craved. He looked around the room. His eyes wild. He saw no allies. He saw no pity. He saw only the shocked, repulsed faces of his colleagues and rivals. He had destroyed himself. I didn't need to say another word. My work was done. I calmly turned my back to the stage. I turned my back on my father, who was still muttering lies. Lies into the microphone. I walked out of the ballroom. I didn't run. I walked. My head held high. I heard the murmur of voices rise behind me as I pushed open the heavy oak doors. I heard my father scream my name one last time. I let the doors swing shut, and I walked out into the cool Chicago night. A free woman. I took a taxi back to our real home. The apartment above the bistro. I didn't take a taxi to the decoy apartment. I was never going there again. When I opened the door, Leo was waiting. He had been pacing. He saw my face and he knew. "It's done," I said. I fell into his arms. I didn't cry from sadness. I cried from a relief so profound it buckled my knees. The weight was gone. The tower of lies. The exhaustion. The decoy apartment. The hiding. The fear it had all been vaporized in that ballroom. "It's over. Leo," I whispered, holding on to him. "It's finally over. We're free." Sophia woke up from the noise. She toddled out of her bedroom, rubbing her eyes, holding her worn-out teddy bear. "Mommy." I swept her into my arms, burying my face in her messy curls. I held my husband with one arm and my daughter with the other. My family. My real, complete, and now public family. I was no longer Clara Barrington, the prop. I was Clara Hayes. Wife and mother. I was whole. The next morning, my phone exploded. Not with calls from my father, but from the rest of my family. Cousins. Uncles. And most importantly, Aunt Margaret. I answered her call. "Clara," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Are you all right?" "I'm better than I've ever been." "Aunt Margaret," I said, my voice steady. She let out a long sigh. "Well, you've done it. You've broken him," she sounded. Impressed. "The family is in chaos. No one has ever stood up to your father. Not like that. Not publicly. He started it. I said simply, "Oh, I know," she said, a dry chuckle in her voice. "He's been starting it for 34 years. He's a bully. He just finally picked on someone who was smarter than he was." She told me the fallout was catastrophic. The Chicago banking community was in an uproar. The video of my father's meltdown pounding the podium, screaming lies. The Crystal Award shattering was already being passed around. His reputation was in tatters. He had been publicly exposed as a tyrant by his own sister and his own daughter. He was isolated. No one was taking his calls. He built his entire life on the appearance of power and legacy. Aunt Margaret said, "And in 5 minutes, you showed everyone. It was hollow. You took away his status. It's the only thing he understands. And you took it." There was a pause. "Clara," she said, her voice softening. I would love, if it's okay, I would love to meet my grandniece, Sophia." Tears pricked my eyes. The first real connection to my side of the family. I'd like that very much. "Aunt Margaret," I said, but I knew my father. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are predictable. He wouldn't just accept defeat. He would try to punish me. 1 week later, the letter arrived. It was from my father's new, very expensive legal team. It was a notice of intent. I read it, and I almost laughed. He was trying to freeze my trust fund, the inheritance my mother, Eleanor, had left me. That was his final weapon. He was going to cut me off, to starve me out. He was going to make me pay for my disloyalty by taking away the money he assumed I was living on. He was a fool. He was such an incredible fool. My mother had known him. She had known the man she was married to. She knew his obsession with control, especially his control over money. She had been the artsy wife, the sentimental one, but she had been brilliant. She had been a fortress. I had a flashback. I was 30 years old. My 30th birthday. I was in a lawyer's office. One I had never seen before. It was my mother's personal attorney. He had handed me a thick stack of documents. "Your mother was a very smart woman, Clara," the lawyer said. "She set up this trust for you. Your father is the trustee. Or was." I remembered reading the clause. My mother had structured it with foresight that was almost prophetic. Arthur Barrington was the trustee only until my 30th birthday. The day I turned 30, I full, unconditional control of the entire principal. Every last cent reverted to me, and me alone. My father, of course, had been given the paperwork to sign 20 years ago. As part of their estate planning, he was so arrogant. He was so dismissive of my mother's little hobbies and her little accounts. He didn't read the details. He just saw trustee and signed it, assuming he would control that money forever. He was too busy building his empire to read the fine print. Poetic justice, his arrogance, his dismissal of my mother, was the very thing that had disarmed him. I looked at the threatening legal letter in my hand. His new lawyers were threatening to freeze an account he hadn't had access to in 4 years. He had no power. He never did. He thought I was using his money to live in that decoy apartment. He didn't know I was using my mother's money, the money he couldn't touch. I handed the letter to Leo. He read it and his eyes went wide. He's trying, I said, a cold smile on my face. He doesn't know. He's firing a blank. I picked up my phone and called his lawyer. "This is Clara Hayes," I said. "I'm calling about your letter. Please inform my father that he is not the trustee of the Eleanor Barrington Trust. I took control 4 years ago, on my 30th birthday. As per the terms of the trust he signed, if you'd like, I can have my lawyer send you the paperwork. Any further contact on this matter will be considered harassment." I hung up. The final inversion was complete. He had no money to take. He had no reputation left. He had no family. He was an emperor with no clothes, screaming in a ballroom that was now empty. Weeks passed. The silence from him was total. Aunt Margaret visited. She met Sophia. She cried. She held her grandniece and told me stories about my mother I had never heard. She and Leo talked for hours. A family was being rebuilt. Not from Arthur's ashes, but from Eleanor's foundation. Then, a month after the dinner, he appeared. He didn't come to the decoy apartment. I had already terminated the lease. He didn't come to the bank. I had submitted my resignation the day after the gala. He came to Leo's restaurant. It was a Tuesday afternoon. During the lull before dinner service, I was in a booth with the account books. Leo was prepping in the kitchen. The bell over the door jingled. I looked up. It was Arthur. He looked small. He wasn't wearing his custom suit. He was wearing a simple coat. His face was gray. The power, the arrogance, the fire. It was all gone. He looked like an old, tired man. He stood by the door, his hands in his pockets. He didn't look at me. He looked at the kitchen, where he could hear Leo chopping. He started, his voice a hoarse whisper. I spoke to my lawyers. I know, I said. He flinched, as if I had hit him. He finally met my gaze. His eyes were red. It's all true. Then, the trust. You've had it all this time. Yes. You let me. He couldn't finish. You let me look like a fool. You did that to yourself. I said. I wasn't angry anymore. He just felt empty. What do you want? Dad. He took a shuffling step into the restaurant. His eyes scanned the room. The place he had once called quaint and manual labor. I want to see her, he whispered. My heart, which I thought was pure ice toward him, felt a single, sharp bung. I want to see my granddaughter. This was the final test. Not of him, but of me. The old Clara would have cried, would have seen this as a victory, a reconciliation. The old Clara would have given in, but I was not the old Clara. It had destroyed her. I was Clara Hayes, and I was in 100% control. I would not hesitate. I stood up from the booth. I walked over to him. So I was standing directly in front of him. I was no longer his prop. I was his equal. You may see her, I said. A flicker of relief, of victory, crossed his face. He thought he had won. On my terms, I said, my voice cutting through his hope. His face fell. This is not your bank. This is not your club. This is my home. You have no power here. Leo had come out of the kitchen. He was standing by the pass, his arms crossed, a white apron on, watching. My husband, my partner. I pointed to Leo. You will respect my husband. You will call him by his name. You will treat him as my partner and as Sophia's father. You will never, ever speak to him the way you did again. I took a breath. You will come here, to this home, when you are invited. You will not drop by. You will not summon us. You will be a guest. And the second you disrespect me, or my husband, or our daughter, you will be asked to leave, and you will not be invited back. I held his gaze. Those are the terms. There is no negotiation. This is not a merger. This is my life. Do you accept? He looked at Leo, then back at me. The last remnants of his pride were fighting with the new, desperate need of a lonely old man. He had lost everything. His legacy was in ruins, and the only scrap of it left was a 3-year-old girl he had never met. He nodded. A small, yerky, broken movement. Yes, he whispered. I accept. I nodded once. Okay, I will call you next week. We can arrange a time. I just stood there, waiting. He understood. He was being dismissed. He turned. His shoulders slumped, and walked out of the restaurant. The bell jingled. I let out the breath I was holding. Leo came over and wrapped his arms around me. How do you feel? he asked. Strong, I said, leaning back into him. I feel like myself, like my mother's daughter. Healing with my father is not a journey. It's a series of boundaries. It's not perfect. It's hard. He slips. He tries to criticize, to control, and I do exactly what I promised. I end the visit. I hang up the phone. He is learning, slowly, painfully, that his power is gone. He is learning to be a grandfather. He is learning to be a guest in my home. I learned that my mother's softness was actually her strength. She built a fortress of love around me, one that even my father, with all his power, couldn't tear down. I learned that true family isn't about the name you carry. It's about the people you choose, the people you protect, and the people who protect you back. I learned that sometimes the only way to save your life is to be willing to burn down the one you were given. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect your own happiness? Have you ever had to set a boundary that felt like it would tear your world apart? Share your story in the comments below. Your strength might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You never know who needs a reminder that it's never too late to take your power back.